I will admit that I went to Burning Man initially for my 50th year celebration with a close friend, which is not uncommon for some people to go to, and it was a very different experience from what I expected. What we didn't ask you yet is how many of you think you will go to Burning Man someday? Probably pretty much everyone here, unless you have a very high concern about dust and some other things that are associated. Expression is to get dusty there. But then as I started to learn more about the organization and the journey it's been on, I ended up continuing to go because I was fascinated that this over 40 million in revenue organization was deciding to live by its principles and consciously donate a lot of the brand market value back to the organization to create a nonprofit, which is now housed in. And I know that I saw some hands and comments, but as it organically grew over 30 years, it had many organizations of which you're involved with, the Black Rock Arts Foundation, amazing art, actually. If you go, it's rare that you see 70-foot structures in the middle of this desert, which they call the playa. It's truly a transformational experience. You don't get that very often. But Burners Without Borders, it does not only Katrina, Houston, many of the relief efforts around the world. And then you probably aren't aware that Burning Man now exists in many cities, as Harley described, around the globe. Mm-hmm. Those also have their different organizational forms. But as Michael Danger Ranger, Michael McKell, or Michael as he's known, that's his real name actually, Danger Ranger is his Burning Man playa name that a lot of people know him for, started looking at the future. There's some concern of how do we have this live beyond ourselves, because this has moved from something that was initially a folly in the desert to a transformational movement. Mm-hmm. And how do we think about that? So what my first question to Harley is, and I did get the opportunity to interview all of the founders, including Larry Harvey, who suddenly passed away this year. And spending time is the only time I would say I felt like a Rolling Stone reporter as opposed to an academic, because he chain smoked for 2.5 hours in his apartment while we interviewed him.
That's Larry.
And that's Larry. But you know, what was the process for you guys to kind of think about the longevity of your organizational form? And you ultimately chose a nonprofit. There's benefit corporations now, there's a variety of different corporations, but why did that feel like the right home for all these different similar but somewhat disaggregated but affiliated organizations to try to fall into?
Well, I think it's worthwhile just looking at the history a little bit. When we became an LLC, that's our first form, we needed to make something fast. We had 3 months to produce an event. We had agencies coming at us, putting a lot of heat on us, and so although we thought a nonprofit might be the right form for us, we didn't have time to do that, so we became an LLC. And as an organization, a movement, an event in the desert that doesn't fit into any boxes, that is completely unusual, that served us very well, because we could be very, very agile over the course of the next 15 years to keep morphing and changing without having to go to a board, without having to jump through a lot of hoops. And we became a very tight team of people working together to make really quick decisions to keep this thing alive and to avoid certain destruction and many, many, many times. But we always knew that that wasn't serving the people. It didn't express the true intent of what people were coming together to do in the desert. So we knew that a nonprofit was probably the closest thing, although that doesn't even seem nothing seems quite right. But for tax purposes and for all those other reasons, we set our sights on becoming a nonprofit as soon as we could. We came up with the Black Rock Arts Foundation in 2002. And our vision at the time, we were fighting the outside world who was saying we were sex, drugs, and rock and roll, which we never were. So we thought our story's art, art, art. We got to tell the story of art. So we created this beautiful nonprofit about interactive art. And that vision wasn't big enough. By 2005, we had a donor wanting to give us $50,000 to give to Katrina to get heavy equipment. But our nonprofit mission didn't allow them to give us a free check for $50,000. He eventually gave the money anyway and later became a board member for the Burning Man Project. We realized our vision wasn't big enough, so we went back to work and came up with a vision that could last 100 years. And it's based on the 10 principles. If you look at those 10 principles, they are flexible enough to have the world change so radically, like the world's already changed since I was in high school to where my daughter being in high school right now. It can change that radically, but those 10 principles are not going to change because that's based in humankind. That's based in the way people interact together. And so we know that we have a vision that's big enough that we can really grow into the future and do it in a way that's true to our spirit, which is all about people and making the world a better place.
One of the things that you also might not know about Burning Man unless you've been there, because of the slides, I don't know if we covered this, but you know, you can't, what can you buy at Burning Man? It's not Coachella. So you can only buy ice and coffee. Everything else is kind of a gift to the community. And I just want to emphasize what really impressed me about what you all decided to do, because you should know these founders often took no salary for many years, right? This wasn't something that made you wealthy personally.
We were all volunteers for the first 10 years, and it was just too big to not pay ourselves and not quit our other jobs, so that's how that happened.
But it was really you know, sweat. You had sweat equity. They talk about that in Founders. You guys had sweat equity literally on the playa, along with the thousands of volunteers that put this on every year. But I know that you guys could have sold it to Live Nation. You could have sold out. You know, after 30 years of work, and instead they donated over $7 million of market value back to the organization to create a nonprofit because they wanted to continue this effort of non-commoditization that's been so important to you all. And I just think Harley's one of these founders that made this happen, and we should give a round of applause to that. I really feel that way. I mean, that is what motivated me to write the case, because it's one thing to have and live these cultural values, to do this at this event, but then to walk the talk personally and the sacrifices you made.
How could you put in 20 years and then sell out? Like, that's just really lame.
It'd be very disappointing to all those people that come every year. So fast forward, I mean, that's now happened. This is a long, you know, it took several years for you to make this transition. It's now actually in this year, ironically, becoming complete. Now that you have the Burning Man Project as a nonprofit, and you actually have over, I think, 40 or more full-time employees now, what has kind of surprised you about that transformation organizationally that has happened?
Well, you guys are studying business or already have your own businesses. We're just a bunch of artists who made this thing happen. I was amazed at how it took us 3 years to plan how to devalue Burning Man and to create a nonprofit that the only thing that could possibly purchase the whole wide world was Burning Man, and make that transition happen so that our taxes weren't affected too badly, so that we could actually afford to do it. And that we had to get paid something to be able to do it. So I think we got $42,000 because that seemed like an amount that would seem acceptable and not raise red flags. Like, that was amazing to go through that process of how taxes and money make it so difficult to do good, to go from being a for-profit to a nonprofit. Yeah.
Now looking forward for the future, I know that's something a lot of you have conviction about, and you know, looking at Will Roger or Crimson Rose or all of the founders that I spoke with, is the fact that this is a cultural movement, that people are transformed at Burning Man. You know, that they go, yes, and maybe they go initially because they think, hey, it's a party on the playa, or there's all these cool neon lights that go all night long, or people wear fun clothes and that seems like a cool thing to do. Or in my case, I was turning 50 and I decided I wanted to do something with a friend that I wouldn't normally do. But, you know, it's a transformational experience. Why do you think that is, and what do you think people then take away from that in their everyday walking lives from there on going forward?
So let's be honest, you don't have to go to Burning Man to find out these kinds of things. You can live in war times and realize the value, like living a fulfilling life is much more important than how much money you make or how much power you wield. You could almost die, like have cancer and come out of it. You could have really loving parents who teach you this from the beginning. But for a lot of people, we don't have the luxury of that. And it takes them doing something crazy, like going to the desert to party, to realize that they're kind of blowing it. They're on the wrong path, and they don't even feel good about their lives. So what's happening now is that transformational experience really is kind of a formula. We know how it works. You have to have an environment or a place that's going to challenge you so deeply that it has to challenge who you know yourself to be. You have to be in a supportive environment where it's free to, you're safe, it's okay to fail and to learn, and people are going to support you in that process. You have to have ritual and ceremony, a place where everyone can ground together through something that's common together. If you have those elements together, you can make a transformational experience for people. And so people are taking this model now, and they're using it around the world, as you mentioned, in all kinds of other countries and all kinds of different ways, and it's starting to happen in business, which just blows my mind. My secret hope is that Burning Man can change corporate America.
And on that note, we want to thank Harley K. Dubois for being here with us today.